And that means we're live. So first of all, Happy New Year. My name is Jay Frost, and if you're new to this party, and it definitely is a party now, I'm the host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. That's all you'll be hearing about DonorSearch today. Not because we don't love them, because we do. They've been kind enough to foster this series and host it for the past now, this is number 8 years. And we've had over 500 programs with people like the guest we have today, who I'll be introducing in a moment. So we're very happy to have not only their sponsorship, but their encouragement of our sector. And if you want to learn more about what they do, you can do that over at donorsearch.net. Of course, while you're there, learning about how you can learn about your donors, pretty important thing to do if you're in our world. Also, you can check out all of the past content from the last year and some before that as well under the resources tab. That's also where you'll see a schedule for everything coming up. So this year, we will have at least as much as we did last year, over 65 programs, including a podcast, webinars for CFRE credit, and conversations like the one we're about to have right now. So if, again, you're new to that, please sign up on the list, join us for that, and let us know what you want to see and hear by just writing me a note or contacting DonorSearch directly. You can reach me and I'll give you all my coordinates as we close out today. But the important thing now is to welcome you into the room. So I want to do that by directing your attention to the bottom of what we all know from Zoom land, and that is the oh, there we go. Right now, Frank is saying hello. So thank you, Frank. I want to encourage people to go ahead and have a normal human, non-commercial conversation right there in the chat. And start by letting us know where you're here from, maybe what organization you're with. That would be a great courtesy to our guest, but also to one another. Use that place in order to have a conversation with each other and have that as active as you like. We may try to draw from that from time to time, but the real repository of your questions and perhaps some of your comments will be over in Q&A. So please do use that throughout. We definitely want to weave your questions into this conversation. That's what Q&A is for. So with that, I want to welcome our friend, Israel Schachter. Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jay, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. And I know you're off there at an undisclosed location in Florida right now, enjoying that. So I really appreciate your being willing to take time from family to talk with us about how to grow kind of our philanthropic family. And we were just having a conversation a few minutes ago that no one benefited from. So if you don't mind, rather than reading your bio, what I'd like to do is ask if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and a bit about your work, and especially the fact that you were doing this before you were doing it under CharityBids. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
I can. I don't like talking about myself, so this catches me off guard a little bit. But one thing that I mentioned to you before, and this is, I think, the item I'm most proud of and the one I find myself talking about the most, is that I grew up as one of 9 children to a Jewish family in New York City. My parents by no means were wealthy. However, until today, and I've been all over the place doing all kinds of crazy things in the world of philanthropy and charity, despite the fact that my parents, that I didn't grow up with, in a wealthy home, I would probably tell you until today that my parents are amongst the most generous people I've ever met. And what I was taught, not because anyone told it to me, but because this was the example shown at home, was that being generous has absolutely nothing to do with how much you have in the bank. You could be very generous with your time, with your connections, with your ideas. And that's really all you got to do. So as a young child, I kind of connected with different causes and different people and different charities. And there was something I wanted to do. I had a niche that I want to help out, but I wasn't in a financial position to help out. So I started when I was already the age of 13, 14 years old, putting events together. My parents had a lot of friends. We traveled as a family a lot. We met people in other communities, other cities, and I started connecting people from a young age, people to causes and people to. And before I even started CharityBids, I had raised over $50 million for charity as a complete volunteer, just because I was in a position to help do something, and I did. So, as I was telling you before, CharityBids was never started on purpose or intentionally, and certainly not, never had in mind to be in this space, certainly not as a business. But here we are.
It's
so
amazing.
Now we are, at our core, I'm not going to bore you with all the details of how we got there. But at our core, we started off in about 2010, 2011 as a charity auction consignment company. So we have about 150 to 200 trips and experiences that we offer at any given time to charities who are looking to I guess, raise the level of excitement at their auction events and raise, supplement the income that they're making, raise some additional funds. We just grew organically over the past 12 years or so until obviously COVID, when we were servicing about 1,500 to 2,000 charities at that time. And overnight, we were done. There was no one traveling. There was nothing happening in person. There was nowhere to go. There was no one to see, and our business was done. And essentially, we used we basically leveraged the relationships that we had built over the years with talent and musicians and actors and comedians and all sorts of things like that. And we started producing virtual events. Throughout the course of COVID, we produced over 200 virtual events for corporations, high net worth families, and for obviously lots of charities. And we became masters. What I believe, over 100 of the events we produced during COVID were for nonprofits. We raised over $200 million during COVID alone through these events. And I think we became masters at storytelling. And what I think we coined the term, I haven't seen it anywhere else. We like to believe that we are great at edutainment. We have found ways to use entertainment to educate people on what the cause is and getting them to connect to the cause, because essentially, especially harder over a computer to captivate someone or engage them or get their attention. You have a very short amount of time to really get the message across and get them to stay. It's going to be a couple of seconds in when they decide whether they're taking the phone call the phone that's ringing, or if they're logging off because their kid just came home from school or the husband wants to go to dinner. Whether they're staying on or not, you don't have a lot of time. So we really mastered that. And now, coming out of COVID, we've been producing live charity events using a lot of what we learned during COVID.
There's a lot to unpack in all of that. But if you don't mind, I want to start by just asking the perennial question, especially as we inch out of this pandemic, and that is, are the events that we knew of before dead?
You're talking about live events?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not certain kinds of walks and other things were really past their prime. Was there a way to resuscitate them? You've just described how you've been doing a lot of events that have been enormously successful. So why is it that some places are seeing a decline in attendance and involvement, but you're saying that it's possible to turn that around?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a couple of things. I think, first of all, and having nothing to do with COVID, I think this was already becoming a problem way before COVID. People don't have the same attention span that they used to have. They don't have patience that our parents, I look at my parents, I think they're superheroes, like that they go to dinners and galas every day. I don't know how anybody does that anymore and stays through it. But essentially, I think people are, and especially it was compounded over COVID, like the attention issue, number one, with being distracted by so many other things happening and so many other competing events and there's noise everywhere. But I think it was compounded all the more so during COVID. And I think post-COVID, I find that people are a lot more picky and selective with how they spend their time and who they want to be with and what events they're going to go to and what events they're not going to go to and who they're going to support and who they're not going to support. That's number one. The second thing is, and I'll talk a little bit more, I just mentioned the word support, and I think that because I think there's a second component to this. So one is the attention and the whole post-COVID thing where I'm not going to an event unless it's going to be a lot of fun and unless my friends are there. Second thing is, I think there's also a generational issue in that, maybe my parents' generation would support a cause because their friends supported it or because their parents gave money, so they gave money. But I find that, my generation and under, we want to know like where our money's going and how it's being used. We want to feel like we're making a difference. We want to see the impact that where our money's going. And we're being a lot more selective. We're not just going to go to the big fancy gala because, in fact, many people will shy away from those big, fancy galas because they have this notion that, they don't really raise real money or they're spending too much on entertainment. And that's like a whole different conversation in its own right. But I think I wouldn't say people of my generation or younger are smarter per se, but they're doing things differently. And they're a lot more picky with where their money's going and what events they're going to. And I think, charities really need to pay attention to both of those things. Number one, to make sure that you are reaching out and engaging the next generation of donors and philanthropists. and getting them young when you still have the ability to connect with them before they, get caught up into other organizations, that they feel they want to connect to, number one. And number two, making sure that your events are the types of events that they want to go to and invite their friends to.
There's been a lot of discussion in our sector about the kind of the hollowing out of what might be described as a middle donor, people who are making contributions that are above this kind of annual gift or sustaining level, and the people who are making these enormous contributions that are really driving philanthropy and giving us these big numbers. And events are one place where, whether they're virtual or live, people have been able to come in for, let's say, a certain kind of ticket price. Sometimes it's very modest, sometimes it's not, and engage in different ways. And then perhaps it's a stepping stone to other kinds of engagement and involvement. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that pathway is being is still able to be maintained for kind of this emerging generation of donors, people who haven't given as much to charity, perhaps because they didn't have the resources before the time, and now maybe they're finding they're in a different place in their life, and this might be a different way of engaging them. How does this work in terms of making sure that this kind of emerging group of donors can sink their teeth into engaging with an organization?
I mean, maybe I take a little bit of a different approach, and I feel that people want to feel like they're making an impact and a difference, and people want to feel important, and people want to feel special. And I can't tell you how many, I just had a call literally yesterday. We had a 1-hour call with a new charity, a new program, a new initiative that is unbelievable, and it's amazing. And they're telling us about all their plans and all their ideas. But when I started giving them ideas, they said, no, we only want donors who are capable of giving $1 million and over. That is such a bad strategy, if you ask me, because, and I look at myself, right? I'm a kid who, I just said before, right. I grew up with parents who didn't have the ability to give a lot of money. I certainly didn't have. And before I was even married, I raised $50 million. You never know who someone is or who they know or what idea they're going to have or who they're connecting to. And I think, I just think it's ignorant to ignore young people who often are a lot more connected on a regular basis with other people, and they're talking about similar issues, and they're on group chats about things that they're passionate about, and they go to more seminars, and they're meeting interesting people, and they're going to conferences, and they're connecting with people. You never know where something's going to come from. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, but that's kind of where I'm at. I think every charity really has to look at themselves and look at their audience and look at who's giving us money now and who's going to be giving us money in 10, 15, 20 years, and how do we make sure we're still around? I think these are all very important things to look at.
Doing something that's relevant to them. And part of that's the content that you're talking about, and I know we're going to talk a lot more about, but part of it also is the question we always get has to do with just how you find the audience in the first place. So let's say you're developing a program, or you partner with someone like yourself who has great ideas for a program, and but you don't necessarily have that audience baked in. You're an organization that's been around for 100 years and perhaps a graying donor pool. And I would be there. So it's no insult to the people who have gray hair, but that means that they may not have the 20 or 30 something in the database who also loves the mission. So do you have thoughts on how to make sure that even if you're providing great content, you can attract kind of this emerging audience?
So I'll give you an example of, I didn't think we were going to go here today, but this is a great example of a program I just ran for the 3rd year in a row, right? And the first 2 years I ran the program, and I came up with this concept because you had a charity that was pretty well established, that had pretty good pool of, older supporters. Yeah. They were relatively unknown to people outside of their immediate donor pool. And certainly not well known to youngsters and millennials or anything like that. And they came to me 6 weeks before they were supposed to have their in-person event, and COVID forced them to, cancel the event. And I loved what they were doing. They're in the space. It's a charity based in New York, but that does work all over the world. Mm-hmm. And they essentially help people with people who are struggling with their mental health, with abuse, with addiction, with all kinds of other in other situations like that. And basically, I came up with this idea, if we're going to have to go virtual, we put together a program. It was a 36-hour live stream event
Oh,
with
wow.
all original content running for 36 hours. And essentially what I did was I reached out to thought leaders in all kinds of industries. So I'm talking about mental health, addiction, abuse for sure,
Yeah.
but also business, entrepreneurship, sports, entertainment, comedy. And we put together, and what I did was I basically had panel discussions, all pre-recorded on Zoom and all edited before the event. We had a 36-hour live stream event. We put together kind of like a TV guide, the same way you'd have TV programming, where every hour, every half hour, what's going on. We did 10 different brand new music videos, brand new music and all that. We did all this in 6 weeks. But essentially what happened was we not only put thought leaders together in these industries who otherwise wouldn't be found talking to each other usually. So we tried to be very creative, but also what we did was we got everyone to donate their time. Not one of the panelists or performers asked for money because it was in the middle of COVID. And essentially we gave each person a graphic to promote their session, their hour or their segment that they're on. And we had 106 thought leaders across every industry, covering every demographic, covering every area of interest. And we had and that year, the first year, we had 876,000 people who tuned in that day. Now you're talking about a charity that was only eight years old, that really was being funded by a couple of the same families year after year. And there was this like explosion of support for the organization, awareness around what they do, awareness around social mental health, awareness around the different issues. So we had, after the event, not only did it raise $5.5 million during that 36 hours from over 4,000 donors. Like, take a charity that basically had a donor pool of a few hundred and take them to 4,000 overnight. But they also, their phones were flooded with people who realized that there's somewhere to call for help. I never knew. I've been struggling in silence. I've been suffering by myself. And now I know there's someone to call who's going to help me. So we now just did it for the third year in a row. But that's just, I guess, one example of how you could, here's an organization that had no audience, and now they have arguably one of the biggest audiences of any, charity event that I know of.
I have to ask you about that one piece because it's something that a lot of people especially those who might use services like DonorSearch would be thinking about a lot. And that is, what's the size of our file? What kind of opportunities within the file? We love everybody who loves us, but a few people can probably make a big impact financially because they have the resources to do so. So what you just described was using, the way I think of it is building a lot of people into the content who are willing to contribute their time. Like you said, they weren't paid, but they all had their own network, right? Their own social network, their own social capital. And they were willing to share that by acting as ambassadors, social ambassadors for the program, so they could have a small house file. But by having those partnerships and so many of these social ambassadors, they could really broaden their reach. Is that something that you're doing a lot of? And do you find many organizations are ready to kind of share the messaging with social ambassadors to build their file?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but one thing that kind of gets into this, we deal with a lot of talent, and we have a lot of charities who call us and say, well, if only, Jamie Foxx would host our event because, his sister had autism and we once helped someone with autism. So maybe he'll come, the people stretch very far. But a lot of times I find that people call us to try to get someone to either get behind their cause or be their brand ambassador, which is all great. And every charity who calls us certainly deserves it. But a lot of times I feel that charities miss the mark, and they're trying to become an overnight success by, if only we could attach ourselves to a celebrity. And I think a lot of the marks that are missed, and this is even more so in live events that I've been to than virtual events. A lot of times you'll have a celebrity in the room, which could be so life-changing to these organizations. It could really bring them into a different stratosphere. And then you go to the event and you see this celebrity reading off a teleprompter. They don't care about the cause. They don't know about the cause. They're just reading. And I think it's very, very important when you're trying to grow your audience and you're trying to, connect with either thought leaders or brand ambassadors or celebrities. You got to make sure that the message is coming off as sincere and authentic, because people today don't want anything but that, right? If it doesn't sound real and it sounds like it's paid and it sounds like someone's doing you a favor, it's actually going to do you more harm than good. So that's the only thing I would caution people. If you're looking for talent and you're looking to connect with people who are going to help kind of build your brand, it better be people who either have firsthand experience in working with your organization, or firsthand experience or a passion for the work that your organization is doing, or someone who could really buy into the cause and make it believable.
So how are you how are you and how would they, if they were doing it independent of you, how would they find people like that? Because it's a world of influencers, right?
Yeah,
If we went onto Twitter right now, we'd find people talking about something. But as you just pointed out, first of all, people want it to be authentic or else they don't trust it. And trust is a big issue in our world. But
yeah.
the other piece is that we also all know, especially younger people know, this is a generalization, but I think it's true that younger people recognize that some of those influencers are paid and others are not. They're doing it out of sincerity. So how does a charity find those kinds of people who really care about the same things and involve them at little or no cost?
So it's a good question. So sometimes it's through board members of theirs who are often well connected in other places. Sometimes it's through a family member of someone who they've helped. But other times it's through people like us who really could take a good look at the charity and what they're doing and try to connect them. I'll give you an example, and I have a million examples, but I'll give you one now from OHEL, Family Services, which is an organization based out of New York. And I'm using them as an example because I see a few people in the chat from that organization. So they for many years had a big dinner in New York and kind of the same thing year after year. And they were looking to change it up and shake things up after COVID. In trying to understand who their audience is and what kind of dinners they have had and what they're looking for and who they're looking to attract, we kind of landed on the idea of, a lot of people in the audience, because it's in New York City, they attend Broadway shows, they love musicals and things like that. Well, if you live in New York in the last, 8 years, you're obsessed with Hamilton. You've seen Hamilton, Hamilton, and what could be better than that? So I started looking like, okay, what if we got someone from a Broadway show? And I start doing research and I say, hey, Miguel Cervantes, who plays Hamilton on Broadway currently, lost a child and has dealt with trauma. And OHEL is an organization that helps family through traumatic experiences like him. So if I'm going to reach out to someone and take a shot at getting them to host the event or perform at the event, well, let me get with somebody who's going to immediately understand what this organization does and why it's important for him to be there. And we got him in. You could look online, Miguel Cervantes opening number for OHEL. It's amazing. But essentially, we took the opening number of Hamilton, which everybody knows, and his introduction to the stage wasn't him reading off a teleprompter. It wasn't him giving him a speech that we wrote for him. It wasn't, him just getting up there and rambling about his family. We basically wrote parody lyrics to the opening number from Hamilton, where he was explaining how he got there and why he's there and his own family situation and how he, identifies and connects with this particular organization, OHEL, and how important it is and how he wishes this organization was around when he needed them. And it felt real and it felt authentic. And we had a very tight program for exactly 60 minutes. I think they had almost 1,000 people in the room. And I don't think one person looked at their phone or talked or left the room the entire program, because from the second he got on stage, people were just in awe. They were just, they were watching. And essentially, we were able to feed them so much more information, which they'll actually remember and retain about what the charity does,
right,
than we would have if we would have gone on for 4 hours showing videos and honorees and speeches. No one's listening to that, and people aren't remembering it. This was an opportunity to even educate people who have been involved in the cause for 20 years. There were people who came and said, we've been at every dinner. We never even knew they do this stuff. So I think that's a great example of finding someone who could really authentically speak to the cause in a way that it's believable, and a way where you also then feel like, if you're in the room and you feel that the host really is connecting to the cause and he's selling it and he's educating you and he's moving you about what they do and why it's important,
right,
your natural reaction is, well, I need to do something about it and I need to support and I need to be part of this.
That's something I want to ask you about, because one of the issues with kind of the more traditional old school events that you're kind of counter programming by creating these much more engaging events, and advising others to do, if they can do it alone, to do it, is that one aspect has been that people would attend and then they thought that their job was done. That I bought my ticket, and it was very transactional in that sense. It's not to say that they didn't care about the cause, but that's how they were that's how we inadvertently trained them to interact with us. That, okay, you got your invitation, you paid your fee, you were done for the year. Are you finding that you can retain and further engage donors through events like this, that it helps you to actually build a relationship versus creating a transactional relationship?
Absolutely, because when you move people in a certain way and they connect to your cause differently than otherwise they used to, there's something about what you do that makes them feel different. They feel it, they know it. And when someone has already committed because of that feeling that you gave them, that this is my thing and I got to do more and I got to be part of this,
Yeah.
it's not transactional anymore. Now they're coming over to Miguel Cervantes in the hallway after that event, just because we're talking about that one. And I have a million other, examples of this. When he was trying to leave that night and go back home to get back to his family, there must have been a line of 30, 40 people, each one wanting to tell him their personal story and how he touched them and how he moved them. And that doesn't happen if you just have speeches and videos, and then that's transactional. When you know how to make people feel a certain way, and you know how to start stirring their emotions and getting them to start thinking about things, that's when that relationship is no more transactional. And now I'm committed, I'm in, we're partners.
I know that there are a lot of different examples of this, and I do want to hear more, and I'm sure everybody in the room does. I do want to ask you the question that they will be asked by others in their staff who are not here with us. And that's, well, yeah, but how much money is it really? How much does it cost? And I don't just mean CharityBids events, but the kinds of events you're describing. What is the real cost of doing something this way? And what is the real return? And then how much of that return can you retain? So can you talk, I know that that's a big question because you got a lot of different events.
It is a loaded question. So I'll give you,
if you can just, give us a little bit of.
So first of all, I'll make you feel good in terms of cost. We've done events from probably $50,000 budgets to 10 million. And so our sweet spot's anywhere in the middle. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. No, listen, every organization has different resources. Every organization has different contexts and people they could call on. Every organization has different, wishes and wants. Some organizations just want, for the next 2 years, we just need to build exposure. Could you bring us an idea that's just going to build awareness around what we do or around the industry, right? So some of the things we get involved with, or some of the campaigns we come up with, aren't even for the purpose of raising money. First, it's help us tell our story, help let people know we're out there. Some of them are, we just got to break even, along those same lines. Some of them are, we have a budget. Some of them, we don't have a budget, but it's all about the storytelling. It's all about the challenge. We're all about the challenge, right? We don't want to do an event that somebody else could have done. We want to, right? And I'll give you another example. There's a charity out of New York, also 70-year-old charity, have been doing, wonderful work for 70 years, really amazing. And they're finding it challenging now with so many other, organizations popping up doing similar things than they're doing in different communities around kind of New York, that they're finding it harder and harder to fundraise. And essentially they came to me with an idea. They didn't really give me a budget necessarily, but I kind of knew based on what they've done in the past. And I made a proposal to them and I said, here's your idea based on what you're looking to achieve, based on, kind of the challenges you're dealing with, both in fundraising and outreach and awareness and all that. Here's an idea we have. So the executive director of the organization said, wow, this is really cool. I've never seen anything like this. So great. I was very happy. He calls me back. He says, we're having a board meeting next week. I'm going to call you back. Calls me back a week later and he says, I didn't get the reaction I was hoping to get from the board. I said, why? What happened? He says, your proposal made everyone feel very uncomfortable. And I said, like from a financial perspective or the idea perspective? He said, no, financially they're okay with the budget, but the idea made them all uneasy. And I said, that's great. And he said, why is that great? I said, because if you don't feel uncomfortable, that means I'm doing what you were expecting. That means I'm bringing you an idea that somebody else could have brought you. The fact that they feel uncomfortable is amazing. That means I'm making them think out of the box. and they're getting uneasy, like, 1 second, we're about to do something or try something that we've never tried before. Are we sure we want to do this? It's not uncomfortable because it's a bad idea. It's uncomfortable because they're afraid to do it. And he called me back a week later and said, I brought your feedback to the board and they're excited to move forward. And I think these are, it's a hard, again, I'm not answering your question in terms of budget, but the answer is every organization needs something else. And every organization has a whole different list of priorities and things that they want to achieve through their events or through their campaigns. And we look at, all the ones that make sense, we look for, we look at and we work with. So I don't think there's an answer of what sort of budget or what this costs. If you're in the space, if you're in the charity space and you're making an impact, and you're looking to make a bigger impact or grow your audience, we're happy to talk to you. Like, let's see what we could come up with. That's the answer.
In terms of virtual versus live, there is probably a difference in cost there, though, for obvious reasons. So have you found that smaller organizations sometimes default to virtual for reasons like that because they're trying to save money? Or are they also recognizing that the world has fundamentally shifted? So a virtual event means you can welcome more people into the room.
I'm going to agree with the latter statement, which is I think the people who are still doing virtual events, it's not for financial reasons because, frankly, I've done live events for, much less than I've done. Like some of the virtual events we've done were in the millions of dollars, right?
Like
so I don't think that means anything. However, there are many organizations who are doing virtual events because if we have the right programming, we could reach people all over the world who are interested in this type of programming. If we have the right host, if we have the right content, if we have the right conversation happening, if we have something interesting, or we have the right honoree or whatever it is, we're going to get way more people that way, and we don't have to feed them or deal with their valet parking. So yes, there is, often a financial benefit too, but I don't think it's a financial decision when, for the people who are still going virtual. I don't think so.
Right. And I want to address the people who are in the room with us. Wendy just asked, is there going to be a question and answer session? And the answer is yes, it's happening right now. So if you have a question, I hope you'll put it in the Q&A so we won't miss it, as I almost did in the chat. So Wendy, go ahead and post your questions there. Any question is a good question in a meeting like this. And we did also have a question earlier from Lori, who said, what's the name of the organization that Miguel Cervantes supported for the loss of children? And actually, there are links to some of that content in the chat. But if you want to repeat the name, Israel, I think it'd be nice for people to know about the organization so they could go and visit it.
So it's called, the full name is OHEL Children's Home and Family Services. Thank you, Rachel Spinner, because I read that in your comment. Now I know the full name. You were probably impressed for a second that I remember the whole thing myself, but you put it there, so I read it. Like Jay said, there, if you scroll down in the comments or scroll up in the comments, there is a link to the opening number that I referenced. But imagine coming into an event, the MC is introduced, he's the lead, he plays Hamilton on Broadway, and this is the first thing that hits you. You're engaged from the first second of the event.
Right. Wendy, again, I'm only happening to catch your question here, but it's a good one, which is why I'm referring to it. But any other questions, make sure they go in the Q&A so I won't miss them. And that's, are we finding that there's Zoom fatigue? This has been a question I've been hearing for a couple of years, and it's a legitimate question. What does it look like in terms of the events and the organizations you're working with? Has that been a factor or not? And how are you adjusting for it?
So I think most people have gone back to in-person events, understandably so. There's certainly, a Zoom fatigue concept. However, having produced over 200 virtual events throughout COVID, I think, again, I'm going to go back to the importance of writing, creating, and producing, killer content. If your content is good, people don't care where they're watching it, right? If you're going and watch, like, is there Netflix fatigue? Is there YouTube fatigue?
Don't ask Netflix right now, but I know what you mean.
My point is, people are still watching movies every night. They're still watching the news. I've never heard of someone having news fatigue. I mean, I had news fatigue going back a couple of years, maybe, but no, if the content is good and you're able to choose the content that you're going to watch, then there's no fatigue, right? You only get Zoom fatigue when it's boring. If your stuff's not boring, there's no Zoom fatigue. So we're very proud of the things, one of the things we did during COVID, and it was actually brought up when we we were asked to produce the Kennedy Honors, which is, televised, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's seen the Kennedy Honors. It's an annual televised event. When they had to cancel their in-person, Kennedy Honors during COVID, we were asked to produce a virtual Kennedy Honors.
No kidding.
And a lot of the content for that. And we actually had people who were on the board who said, well, maybe we should just cancel it this year. But when they saw the types of content that we were creating, that we were, proposing to produce for them and to create, then they realized like, oh, this is going to be just like a televised program. There's no reason for it not to be. And not only did we, this is also important. Not only did we, impress and blow away the same people who come every year, but by going virtually, we were able to take an event that is so unattainable to most people on the street,
right?
Because it's so expensive and so exclusive, and there's only a couple people in the room, and there's, all that. And all of a sudden, you're able to have thousands and thousands of guests who are giving you money, who are learning about the work that you do, who are engaging, who are loving the content, who want to support, who are sharing the content after the event with their friends, right? Because that's another thing about virtual. If I go to a live event, right, only the people in the room are benefiting or gaining from the content that you produced. When you're producing content digitally, and this we took this very seriously throughout COVID, we didn't want to produce any content in any virtual events that cannot be repurposed and reused afterwards. Not only for people to share it who missed the event, but as a marketing piece, moving forward. So as an example, again, I'll go back to OHEL because they're all on here and we're now sharing the thing. But we've had thousands and thousands of views of that video from people who have nothing to do with OHEL after the event, and it's still getting hundreds of views every single day. So, right, if you're going virtual and you're creating virtual, I wouldn't worry about Zoom fatigue if your content is good. And I would even say that if your content is good enough, it's going to continue to be shared and be a tool that you could use to raise money and raise awareness in future.
And now I know one of the things we can't talk about today because it would be a whole different discussion, would have to do with intellectual property. But it is one of the things I know that as a firm producing this kind of work, you considered when you had somebody rewriting parody lyrics to something from, and then you had one of the main actors from Hamilton performing those. So this is one of those things where I know there would be a benefit to having expertise, whether it's internal or external with the firm, somebody who can advise us on doing things, especially if they're going to be repurposed, right? Because if you have music from Hamilton, you have to have the rights to be able to, revise that content and share that content for the purpose of supporting a charity. If you don't do that, then there's a little bit of trouble there. So
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to comment on that. But it's not as difficult as people think. Let's just say that.
But it's good to always have good advice.
Yes,
which
absolutely.
you provided to your client. We did have a question about. From Jared, who asked what you're seeing in terms of online gaming and live stream events. And this is something we've seen that kind of is a departure. It might even be in the world of Twitch, for example, which is a little different from like an online, essentially telethon. But what are you seeing in that realm? And then do you see that maybe eclipsing the very traditional events like golf events, which I don't know if those are coming back in a big way or not.
I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to answer that question. What I will tell you I'm seeing is that my kids are playing way too many video games. That I could tell you for sure. Do I see golf tournaments ever becoming, a thing that people don't do? Absolutely not. People who love to play golf are always going to play golf, and golf tournaments that are done right are always going to do well. I don't believe that's a thing in the past. I don't think video games are going to take over what we do. I think, again, going back to, I'll just tell you, going back to the virtual Kennedy Honors, just because I just mentioned it.
Sure.
The idea we had was, one of the reasons why a bunch of the board members were pushing to cancel the event was because of how this event makes people feel when they come, that it's so special and so exclusive, and it's such an unbelievable night that if people are missing that sensation that they wait the whole year, to have, and that special feeling, if we can't give that to them, then, maybe better not to do it. And essentially what we did was, and, we kind of gamified, this is as close as I got to video game. I got permission to go into the Kennedy Center after hours. I had a photography team go in and they shot the Kennedy Center with 360-degree cameras. And we recreated an exact replica of the Kennedy Center, the entire building and all the spaces that people are used to going to when they go to the Kennedy Honors. We recreated it in virtual reality, and with people's, click of a mouse, They were able to walk the red carpet. When they walked the red carpet, there was the step and repeat. There was the theme song of musicians playing live, the theme song of the Kennedy Honors.
Yep.
They were walking through the lobby and they were able to see virtually other friends of theirs who they are used to seeing on the red carpet or in the lobby, and they were able to talk to them virtually through this platform that we built. And then they were able to go upstairs, and each room was a tribute room to another one of the honorees with all kinds of original content that we created for them. So we kind of gamified the experience, but gave people the exact experience. I'll never forget, there were people freaking out because they came to the virtual Kennedy Honors, and David Foster and Catherine McPhee were on the red carpet, and they got to talk to them, right? They were able to talk to them virtually, and who gets to do that in real life? So, you know, that's as close as we got to gamifying anything in terms of an event. But I don't know enough about the whole Twitch and, you know, that whole world to give a educated answer on what you just asked.
We have some other programs. Actually, I'll just say this back to the member of the audience, Jared, that we've done a couple programs on that, and the only reason I'm familiar with it is because of the demographics of our family. And so if Mr. Beast is watching, or Pokimane, we do know that you raise a lot of money for charity, and we appreciate you. So the rest of us will catch up there. But what you're describing is just, I guess, another platform for doing these things. And it sounds like, Israel, you're very much in touch with not only the content that's really appropriate for the audience, but to attract them there and engage them there, but also something that really affects them in an emotive way. So when you described the Kennedy Center Honors, actually one of the first places where I worked was right above the Eisenhower Theater. So when you describe walking on the red carpet and all those things, for us as an audience watching the Kennedy Center Honors, that's pretty cool if you've seen them before, and then you can see them again. For anybody who maybe has been sitting in one of those chairs at the Kennedy Center Honors, walking the red carpet, being in a room with people that you know, is also a very special experience. So it sounds like you're managing when you build these experiences, when your clients do, when others that you know do it, they're creating an experience which is more emotive. So it's much more tangible and real for people. As you do that over time, we keep getting new stuff coming at us. So you've had, I guess, Wolfgang Puck, Jamie Foxx, Elton John, Usher, people like this that you've worked with. How do you keep fresh? Not just the whole firm, but you, because you're in the midst of this stuff, but there's going to be somebody, you know, who's 18 right now, who's a major influencer that neither of us have heard of, but it is your business and you are fresh. So how do you keep there? How do you keep in touch so it's useful and beneficial to your clients and to the sector?
So the first thing is, I think, you know, this has to do with probably, you know, I can't diagnose myself after the fact, but I wasn't a great student in school. I didn't do well in school. I probably had every attention deficit disorder you could think of. I know I had eye tracking issue and auditory processing issues, and, you know, things that today we know what's going on, but I had a very difficult time as a student in school. And I think as a result of that, in order to get through school and in order to make it through life, I always had to kind of look at things and approach things from a very different perspective than everybody else. So as an example, you just mentioned Usher. I had a client who has a good relationship with Usher. We were doing a virtual event for them, and they naturally said, like, hey, you know, Usher's willing to do a song. I said, that's great, but I could go on YouTube and listen to Usher sing a song that's probably going to sound a lot better and look a lot better than him singing on a Zoom. And she goes, but we have him, so why wouldn't we use him? I said, you will use him, just not to sing. She goes, but what do you mean? He's a singer. I said, no, we're going to have him teach everyone on the Zoom a dance. And it became interactive, and he started calling on people and clicking on people, and it was so much fun. He showed up with a bathrobe and these big plush slippers with smiley faces on them, and just, you know, that created a whole new experience for people. So I don't, you know, I never ever like to produce the same event twice, even for the same organization. Every event I do has to be different than something else I've ever done. We got to take, you know, I got to dive deep into the charity and their needs and their history and their past and where they're trying to get to and who their audience is and what kind of things they go for. And I'm always looking to recreate. And I think when you kind of constantly have to think like that and take a different approach to everything as everyone else, you know, again, I think it came from, you know, things in my childhood where I was, you know, kind of forced to think differently on how to get through things. I think it kind of comes naturally at a certain point. And once you build a reputation as a company of constantly, recreating the wheel and coming up with new things, then you have to do that every time, right? You can't
Yeah.
go back to
Yeah.
doing something that someone else does. So I think that's a bit of that answer there. And we've been very fortunate and privileged to do a lot of work with a lot of interesting people and getting them to do really cool things. To have Steve Harvey, we did for a corporation. I had Steve Harvey. There were, when I was learning about the company, they told me there's two divisions, and the two divisions in the company are always fighting with each other, and which one's more important. And I was like, oh, okay. So we have Company Feud, and we got Steve Harvey to host a game of Company Feud, and there was the event. So we try to use the talent we have. And by the way, I think, although they probably won't admit it, I think a lot of the talent enjoys being challenged and pushed to do things that they're not usually asked to do. And when you give them an experience that feels good, or an experience that really worked well, they kind of want to do more with you, right?
Yeah.
So I had, there was a natural gas company that hired us for an event once. They had to cancel their annual event. And I came up with the idea of doing the Gassy Awards. Instead of the Grammys or the Oscars, we had a full out, thing. And Jamie Foxx was the host of the Gassies, and we made statuettes, and we had nominees, and we had packages of each of the nominees showing, the same way they do in the movies. Each one of the employees in each category. We had one guy getting coffee, and one guy driving his pickup truck, and one guy, falling down the steps or whatever we're doing. And those were the nominees, and the people within the company all voted, anonymously before the event. And Jamie did an opening number all about, it was stuff like that.
It sounds hilarious, but you just channeled my question. I was going to ask you, okay, great. It raises money. It's good for the charity. It's fresh. It brings in new audience. Hopefully maintains those people after the event. But what is it like for the celebs? Because we tend to talk about them like they're commodities, and they're not. They're human beings. So when you've done all these things and you've brought these people in and you gave them a chance to appear and teach a dance in their bathrobe with, fluffy slippers, that must make it so much more rewarding and fulfilling for them, because everybody's after them for something, but you just gave them something.
Yeah. So I think number one, it puts you in a different category as everybody else who's asking them for stuff. And the next time you call, they're more willing to take your call and listen and work with you because they know the last time was so much fun. The second thing is that if you could use these, celebrities to kind of connect with them in a way where they're not used to people connecting with them. Like if you really pick the right person for the right cause and get them to do the right content and have the right interactions. I'll give you an example. I just produced a charity gala in Miami about 2 weeks ago. Okay, so we're talking about an organization. This was only their third annual gala in Miami. The last year's gala had 600 guests. And they asked me this year to kind of help them make something more substantial. I got Andrea Bocelli to perform, and we took the food up 100 notches, and just the whole experience was really amazing. We had 1,200 people in the room, so we doubled the size of the audience. We raised $13.5 million over dinner. And when Andrea Bocelli and his wife were honored at the event, and following him accepting the award, he then performed, which was great. And when he turned around, they gave him a gift to him and his wife, and he spoke a little bit, and his wife gave an acceptance speech, and then he was about to go perform. And he turned around to his wife, and they have this award in their hands, and he says, "Now we really got to get to work, because the people in this room obviously believe that we did something to deserve this, but our work only begins now. We have to prove to them that we deserve what they think we deserve, and we got to really get to work now." So when you could, I was talking at the beginning of this about getting the audience to connect, but a big piece of the art and a big piece of what we do is making sure, and I kind of alluded to this, is making sure that you're also anyone you bring into anything you do is impacted equally the same, where they want to do something too. And they want to, this isn't, and even fun events that I've done with Usher, right? It might have been fun, but he's remembering it. It stood out. It made him feel good. It gave him something. And then a couple of weeks later, he actually called me on a project he was working on. He's like, "Hey, I need some creative ideas." And that would have never happened if I would have just said, "Yeah, sing a song, whatever you want."
Right. Yeah.
So
I know we have a couple more questions, so if you don't mind, Israel, I want to make sure we tackle them.
Sure.
One is this is something I definitely would have asked Kara, which is what's been the most surprising thing that you've experienced in the last few years doing this kind of work?
The most surprising? That's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that, but I think the most surprising is how much more work we all have to do and how much more capable we all are than we give ourselves credit for. I think if everybody would channel their energies and their gifts and their talents
Mhm.
to do whatever they feel speaks to them in terms of philanthropy and giving back and making an impact, I think people would be surprised that they could do a hell of a lot more than they think. And I think we saw that a lot over COVID. You saw a lot of people coming out and making, big things happen online when they were forced to do things online that nobody would have ever believed. So I think maybe I think that's what that is.
That may not be a bad place to kind of start to wrap up, but I want to ask you, you started by talking about your family, which is an important place to begin. And I don't know if your parents are still with you,
They
but
are.
uh, what do they have to say about all this?
I don't even know if they know what I do. Um, no, my parents are very proud of me. They see my work. They know what I do. I'm one of 9 children, so
Right.
every 9 days they notice something I do. So
But they're
uh,
generous folks, and you
they're
practice
very, very generous. You know
that
what?
book.
My parents are very involved in their community, and they're not necessarily involved in my day-to-day business or my work, or they don't necessarily see everything I do, but what they do see, they're definitely very proud of. I'm doing things very differently than they did it. I'm giving back in a very different way than they did, but
Mhm.
I always tell people all the time, I give them the credit. They may have not taught me, how to do what I do necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but the tools I have is all, the tools I have and the gifts I have and the things I've been able to do with those gifts are all things that I saw at home. Like, this is just what one is supposed to do with whatever they're blessed with.
Right. That's a beautiful kind of way to conclude. But I do want to encourage people to be able to learn more about you and your work, whether it's just to be inspired by it or if they need assistance to be able to reach out to you for it. So, how can people learn more about you and CharityBids? How do you want people to connect with you?
Um, I guess our website, charitybids.org, charitybids.com. There's information on there. There's contact forms on there. There's there's some videos on there of previous things we've done. There's information about the different buckets of what we do, whether it be virtual events, live events, consignment trips and experiences on consignment for charity auctions. We do all that. And yeah, that's the best way to, I guess, to connect with us from the charity perspective.
Well, I'm tempted to ask you what's the hottest consignment event right now, but I'm gonna look for that afterwards. I'm gonna encourage everybody to do the same.
I'll tell you what it is.
What is
I'll
it?
tell you what it is. And it's something that actually we, after doing this for many, many years, we actually decided to do something bigger with it. We have a white party on Andrea Bocelli's house in Tuscany every summer. We have about 400 guests who go to an unbelievable evening of food and music in his backyard every summer. And he's had, guests to come out with him, whether it be David Foster or Kristen Chenoweth or Catherine McPhee or Reba McEntire. Every year is somebody else. And it's
Wow.
just an unbelievable evening. And basically, because of the demand and because of how popular this became, we are now actually thinking of trying to do something similar in Napa Valley, where we have a whole weekend of music and events, and we take out hotels and restaurants and bars. People seem to love him, and we're replicating this model with other, performers as well. So I think if you're asking me the number one thing we sell more than anything, it's definitely that package.
Wow. Well, and he's coming to DC for a private event in February. You might even be behind that, so I'll have to talk to you offline about that later. But so grateful for all of this stuff that you've shared today, both a window on why it's important as well as how you make it work. And hopefully, at a minimum, it inspires some of us to do something that's truly engaging and contemporary, and to reach out to people like you when we need assistance in getting it done well. Our thanks again to Israel Schachter, CharityBids, and to all of you for hanging out with us. We did have a question about whether or not this would be emailed to you. It will not. Instead, it will be placed with the entire library of all the sessions in the Philanthropy Mastermind series over at DonorSearch.net. Look under the resources tab. You can see webcasts on demand, as well as see free accredited sessions. So you can build up your credits to get that CFRE next to your name. And also our podcast, which is a conversation. Actually, there were elements here that are very similar to that. It's all about the people in philanthropy and in this work. You can listen to all those wherever you listen to your podcasts and catch them over at DonorSearch.net. And while you're there, if you would, please check out what they have to offer, because if you care about your donors, and I'd like to think that you do, you can learn a lot about them through DonorSearch, and our gratitude to them for giving us a place to have conversations with people like Israel Schachter. So with that, I want to say thanks to you all, and join us next week. We have 2 more programs coming up you won't want to miss. Until then, take care, stay healthy. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.